Israel had hoped that the United States would be able to create an international force to break the Egyptian blockade of the Straits of Tiran. When it became clear that the United States would be unable to do so, Israel understood it was on its own. Most of Israel's male population had been mobilized into the reserves, a situation that could not last indefinitely. The cabinet finally authorized a preemptive strike against the Egyptian forces. The Israeli Air Force had been training for such a strike for many years. In the morning of June 5, 1967, all of Israel's 250 airplanes took to the skies, all heading towards Egyptian air bases. They left behind only 2 planes to defend Israel. At 7:30 Israel time, the first targets came into view. Israeli planes began attacking Egyptian airfields. They started by disabling the runways by creating craters on both ends and the middle of each runway. Then, with all the Egyptian planes trapped, they began strafing them. By 8 a.m. it was clear the attack had succeeded beyond the hopes of its planners. After a second wave of attacks, a total of 286 Egyptian planes had been destroyed. All of Egypt's airfields were out of commission. It was the most successful air attack in history. When the word reached the army headquarters of the success of the air operations, orders were given to the ground troops to begin an attack. After a day of heavy fighting, Israeli troops in the north broke through, and by the evening had reached all of their goals well ahead of their time. In the south, a division led by Ariel Sharon had similar success, penetrating difficult Egyptian defenses and thrusting deep into Sinai. Israel had hoped that Jordan would stay out of the fight. However, the Jordanians began heavily shelling the outskirts of Tel Aviv and the Israeli Air Force base at Ramat Aviv in the Galil. And finally, all of West Jerusalem came under shell fire. 6,000 shells landed, over 1,000 civilians were wounded, and 20 died. The Jordanian Air Force also attacked targets in Israel. Israel at first had refrained from attacking Jordanian Air Force bases, but responded by wiping out the total Jordanian Air Force on the ground. The Jordanians went on to capture Government House, which was a UN headquarters that commanded the high ground over West Jerusalem. The Jordanians also threatened to capture Mount Scopus. This convinced Israel that there was no choice but to begin an offensive against Jordanians. By nightfall of June 5th, Israeli troops had advanced to cut off Jerusalem from Ramallah, thus foiling any attack on Mount Scopus, while other forces were beginning to advance on Jenin. While the Israeli army had been very successful during the first day of the war in eliminating the first line of Egyptian defenses, the Egyptians still had a large army largely intact in Sinai. The Israeli army had anticipated a difficult day of fighting on the second day of the war. But for reasons that are disputed to this day, an order went out to Egyptian forces to retreat towards the canal. The retreat turned the day into a total rout as Israeli forces swiftly advanced with limited opposition. On the Jordanian front, Israel made one last plea to King Hussein to stop the shelling, which he ignored. Orders then went out to capture Jenin on the West Bank and to surround the old city. Overnight, a paratroop brigade that had been slated to fight the Egyptians was moved to Jerusalem. The second day of the 6-day war on the Jordanian front began at 2 a.m. as Israeli troops began an assault, the goal being to reach Mount Scopus. The battle took place first to capture the police academy and then on to Ammunition Hill. The battle for Ammunition Hill went on for 2 hours and was the bloodiest battle of the war. 71 Jordanians and 35 Israelis died. By the end of the day, the old city was almost surrounded. In the early hours of the morning of June 8th, the Israeli government debated whether to capture the old city. The army first completed the surrounding of the old city by capturing the Mount of Olives. When Jordanians could not guarantee a full ceasefire, the order was given to capture the old city. At 9:45, the morning of June 5th, Israeli tanks fired at the Lion's Gate, opening the way for troops to move in. They quickly fanned out, capturing the Temple Mount. In the command of the Israeli paratroops, Mota Gur radioed the commander of the Central Front, General Uzi Narkis, Har Habayit Biadenu, the Temple Mount is in our hands. Shortly thereafter, the first Israeli troops, led by Chief Rabbi Shlomo Goren, reached the Western Wall, Judaism's holiest site, where Jews had not been able to access for 19 years. The Western Wall was now in Israeli hands. In the Sinai, Israeli troops continued to advance. In the north, they came close to the Suez Canal, and in the south they reached the Mitla and Gidi passes. On June 8th, the fourth day of the war, Israeli forces completed their conquest of the West Bank and reached the Jordan River, blowing up the bridges over it. In the Sinai, the Egyptian army continued its retreat, but the Israeli forces were waiting for them, blocking the passes. In a number of hours, they killed thousands of Egyptian troops and destroyed hundreds of vehicles. They captured so many prisoners that eventually the word was given only to hold officers and let everyone else go. Soon, although not originally planned, Israeli forces reached the Suez Canal. Throughout the war, the Syrians had shelled Israeli settlements, and arguments had ensued what to do about the Syrians. Defense Minister Dayan had opposed any attack on the Golan Heights, but on the morning of June 9th he changed his mind and ordered an assault on the Golan Heights. The assault began immediately and was completed by midday of June 10th, when a ceasefire went into effect. In 6 days, the Israeli army had defeated the enemies on 3 fronts and more than tripled the size of the country. 679 Israelis lost their lives and 2,563 were wounded, some of whom would later die of their wounds.